It's your boy, The Truck, and today we're going to be reacting to Everytime Gen-Z made governments lose control. And with that, let's begin.
Nepal 2025. In September 2025, Nepal's government banned
Dude, what is
26 social
Creepcraft
media
doing?
apps, including TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp. They said the apps broke the rules, but the real reason was a hashtag. For months, young Nepalis had been posting about Nepo kids, the children of powerful politicians. They were showing off luxury cars and trips to Europe, while 20% of young people had no jobs. One photo of a minister's son posing with designer gifts went viral. Days later, the ban came. On September 8th, thousands of students marched in Kathmandu to protest the ban. Police opened fire and killed 19 on the first day. But
Dang.
instead of stopping the protests, the killings moved them online, to Discord, the one app the government forgot to ban. A youth group called Hami Nepal made a server named Youths Against Corruption. Within days, 150,000 people joined. The server had channels for protest routes, death counts, and votes on which government buildings to target. Protesters wore school uniforms, so police would look worse attacking them.
Oh,
Within
man.
48 hours, Parliament was burning, and so was the Supreme Court. The army had to fly the Prime Minister to a military bunker in the forest and took control of the country. But they needed a leader who wasn't military. So the Discord server held a vote. 100,000 people voted, and
100,000 people on
99.6% picked the
Discord
same person.
voting
Sushila
for, like, some
Karki, an
president
ex-judge who had supported the
or
protests.
prime
The
minister?
army said yes. Nepal now has its first woman prime minister. She was picked on Discord. Bangladesh 2024.
Oh, come on,
Ever played a
ad.
game that uses AI throughout the entire experience? The moment
2024.
Alright,
In
Bangladesh.
1971, Bangladesh fought a war against Pakistan to become a country. To honor the fighters, the government saved 30% of public jobs for their families. But 53 years later, those families were loyal to the party in power, and everyone else was locked out. In July 2024, students started protesting the rule. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina had been in power for 15 years, and she didn't take it well.
Oh,
She
she
called
was
the
in power
students
since
Razakars,
2009.
which means traitor in Bangladesh. But instead of scaring them off, the insult brought more people into the streets. The government decided to shut down the internet for 11 days, hoping to stop them. But without social media, people couldn't see what was happening, so they went outside to find out. The blackout made things worse. Police and soldiers opened fire, killing 1,400 people
Oh,
over the next few
gosh.
weeks. But every funeral brought more protesters, and the crowds kept growing. On August 5th, hundreds of thousands reached Hasina's palace. The military called her and said they would not fire on their own people. Hours later, she boarded a helicopter and flew to India. She has not returned. A Nobel Peace Prize winner named Muhammad Yunus now leads the country, and his government called what happened the Gen Z revolution. In November 2025, a Bangladeshi court sentenced Hasina to death for ordering the killings. After 15 years in power, she's now on the run. Sri Lanka 2022. In
Okay.
2021,
I wonder why all of them are in 2020 to 2025.
from other
Or
countries.
2026,
Without
my
them,
fault.
the rice crops failed and food prices doubled. But that was just the start. The government had been borrowing money for years to build highways, ports, and airports that no one used. By early 2022, the country ran out of dollars, which meant they couldn't buy fuel, medicine, or food from other countries. Gas stations closed, hospitals ran out of drugs, and the power went out for 12 hours a day. The Rajapaksa family had run Sri Lanka for most of the last 2 decades. Gotabaya was president, his brother Mahinda was prime minister, another brother handled the money, and a nephew was also a minister. People blamed all of them. In April 2022, students set up a camp outside the president's office in Colombo. They called it Aragalaya. They used Facebook to spread the word, and the camp grew every day as workers, monks, and families joined. For 3 months, the government ignored them. So on July 9th, protesters called for a march. The government ordered everyone to stay home, but people ignored it. There was almost no fuel left in the country, so crowds forced railway workers to run trains and bring them to Colombo anyway. Hundreds of thousands showed up, pushed past the guards, and broke into the palace. They jumped into the president's pool, lay on his bed, and cooked in his kitchen.
Hey,
That
man.
night, Gotabaya fled to the
might
Maldives
be
on an
good.
army plane. Bulgaria 2025. In November 2025, Bulgaria's Prime Minister Rosen Zelyaskov tried to raise taxes on workers. For young Bulgarians who were already leaving the country to find jobs, it was one more reason to go. Bulgaria is the poorest country in the EU and one of the most corrupt. The government had fallen apart 7 times in 4 years, but the same politicians always came back. The real power was Delian Peevski, a businessman so corrupt that both the US and UK had banned him from their countries. He wasn't in the government, but everyone knew he ran it. On November 26th, protests started. Young people spread the word on TikTok and Instagram, and influencers told their followers to show up. By December 1st, up to 100,000 people filled the streets of Sofia. It was the biggest protest in over 30 years. The government dropped the tax plan, but the protests kept growing. On December 10th, up to 250,000 people marched across the country. They pointed lasers at the parliament building and wrote "Mafia out" on the walls, aimed at Peevski. The next morning, lawmakers were about to vote on removing the prime minister. He was expected to survive, but minutes before the vote, he quit anyway. Bulgaria is now heading to its 8th election in 4 years. Madagascar 2025. In 2025, only 36% of Madagascar had electricity, and even that kept going out. Power was down for 12 hours a day, and water stopped running across the capital. President Andry Rajoelina had been in charge since 2009, when the military put him there. 16 years later, 75% of the country was still poor, but Rajoelina was spending $152 million on a cable card nobody asked for, while his son went
I don't get it. Like, why doesn't he do, like, spend on, like, the GDP of the nation? Oh, I know. He's corrupt. Okay, let's continue.
to an expensive school in Switzerland. Students started asking why the president's kids got chances they would never have. On September 25th, protests started. Rajoelina wasn't even in the country. He was in New York giving a speech at the United Nations, so back home there was no one to stop what came next. A Facebook page called Gen-Z Madagascar became the place to organize, and it got 100,000 followers in 5 days. Their slogan was Leo Delastage, which means fed up with blackouts. The government sent
I wonder
police
what
with tear gas and
Madagascar's
real bullets, killing at least 22
official
people.
language
But
is. Is
instead of
it
stopping the
English?
protests,
Is
the
it
killings spread
French?
them
Is
to
it
6
their
cities.
own?
Rajoelina tried to get his supporters out in the streets, but only a few hundred showed up. An army unit called CAPSAT, the same unit that had put Rajoelina in power back in 2009, switched sides and said they wouldn't shoot protesters anymore. On October 14th, Parliament voted to remove him, 130 to 0. That night, he flew out of the country on a French military plane. Kenya 2024.
Oh, not another ad.
He flew out of the country on a French military plane. Kenya 2024. In 2022, William Ruto won Kenya's election by calling himself a hustler. He said he would fight for working people, not the rich. 2 years later, 67% of young Kenyans still had no jobs.
7?
Then, Ruto tried to pass a law that would raise taxes on bread, diapers, cooking oil, and the phone payments people use every day. He needed the money to pay off the country's debt. In June 2024, young Kenyans started spreading the word on TikTok with the hashtag #RejectFinanceBill 2024. They used ChatGPT to turn the 70-page law into simple language and translated it into local languages. They leaked the phone numbers of lawmakers and flooded them with calls and texts. When an older protest leader named Raila Odinga tried to join, they told him to sit this one out. It was their turn now. On June 25th, lawmakers voted on the bill anyway. It passed 204 to 115, so the protesters stormed the building. For the first time in Kenya's history, crowds broke into parliament, set parts of it on fire, and two. Lawmakers ran through basement tunnels and hid in ambulances. Police shot and killed at least 22 people that day, but the crowds kept coming. The next day, Ruto dropped the bill. The people have spoken, he said. It was the first time Gen Z forced an African government to back down. China, 2022. For 3
I think
years,
I've heard about
China
this
had
one.
the strictest COVID rules in the world. In Shanghai, 25 million people were locked inside their homes for months, and when food ran out, they couldn't leave to get more. In some buildings,
That's pretty sure
officials
just
locked the doors
martial
from the
law.
outside so no one could get out. Young people couldn't find jobs. On November 24th, 2022, the locked doors killed someone. A fire started in an apartment building in Urumqi, a city in western China. 10 people died because they couldn't get out. Videos showed the fire truck parked far from the building, and the water couldn't reach the flames. When the government said the victims just didn't know how to escape, it made people angrier. 2 days later, a student in Nanjing stood on campus holding a blank piece of paper. Officials took it from her, but more students joined. In China, the wrong words can get you arrested, so they held up blank pages instead. The paper said nothing, which was the point. The protests spread to 21 provinces, 39 cities, and over 100 universities. Some crowds shouted, "Step down, Xi Jinping," just weeks after he became the first leader since Mao to win a third term in power. It was the biggest protest in China in 33 years. On December 7th, less than 2 weeks after the fire, the government dropped zero COVID. The news said the virus had gotten weaker and never mentioned the protests. Chile, 2019. In
Oh
October
gosh.
2019, Chile's government raised the metro fare by 30 pesos. That's about 4 US
That
cents.
doesn't
The
seem
economy
much.
minister told people if they didn't like it, they should wake up earlier to pay less. That made things worse. Chile was one of the most unequal countries in Latin America, and it was still running on the system created under the Pinochet dictatorship in 1980. The dictatorship ended in 1990, but the system never changed. High school students started jumping the turnstiles and refusing to pay. They spread the word on social media and chanted, "Evade, not pay, is another way of fighting." On October 18th, the metro shut down at rush hour to stop them, and the city exploded.
Oh.
Millions of people were stuck with no way home, and by that night, protests had spread across the country. The slogan was everywhere. It's not 30 pesos, it's 30 years. The fare was small, but the anger went back to everything that hadn't changed since 1990. Police fired pellets and tear gas. Over the following weeks, 34 people died and 460 lost
Oh
their eyesight.
gosh.
But instead of stopping, the protests grew. Over 1 million people marched in Santiago, the biggest protest in 30 years. The government agreed to hold a vote on rewriting the laws. In October 2020, 78% of Chileans voted yes. A year later, Gabriel Boric won the presidency. He was 35, the youngest president in Chile's history, and a former student protest leader himself. He was also the first left-wing president since Salvador Allende, who was overthrown by Pinochet with U.S. help in 1973. Sudan, 2019. In December 2018, Sudan's government tripled the price of bread, and people started protesting. President Omar
It
al-Bashir
said
had been in
December
power for 30
2018, but
years.
not.
Under
But why
his rule,
can't it just say
women could be whipped
2018
for
and not
wearing pants or
2019?
not covering their hair. More than half the country was under 19. A quarter of young people had no jobs, and most had never known anyone else in charge. Women made up 70% of the crowds, and people started calling them Kandaka, a word for the queens who ruled Sudan thousands of years ago. Their slogan was, "Just fall, that's all." Police killed over 40 people, but instead of stopping, the crowds kept growing. By April 2019, the protests had lasted 4 months. On April 8th, a 22-year-old student named Allah Salah stood on top of a car in a white dress, one arm raised, leading the crowd in chants. Someone took a photo, and within days it had spread around the world. She became known as the Kandaka of the revolution. 3 days later, hundreds of thousands surrounded the army's main building in the capital. The army split. Police fired on the crowd, but soldiers stepped in and fired back to protect the protesters. On April 11th, the military said al-Bashir was gone. After 30 years in power, he's been in prison ever since. Iran 2022 to 2026.
Landover, a Catan-inspired hexagon resource game for up to 4 players. Use the feature-rich map.
20.
Well, I'm sorry to say, but we're gonna have to end it here. If you like this video, please drop a like and subscribe and leave a comment of anything. And I'm gonna see you tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, probably more of today, but peace.